Everybody, this is Perch. Here's a viewer question, and it sets up an interesting conversation using comics as a stepping stone. And, to be fair, writers like Chris Claremont had put out books, and I think he had made several comments that, it wasn't comics was a stepping stone for him, but he did see a bigger world. Peter David as well. They had other things going on, whether television writing or books or other things. Peter David has a very fine Zorro book out there that's quite good. But anyway, this question kind of hits on that. It says, Dear Perch, in a recent video, you spoke about the lack of money in comics and how that prevents the big two from bringing in talented people. It was a good video, and I very much agree with a lot of what you said. In the video, you mentioned Sana Amanat and implied that her inability to become a Disney executive might be because of her lack of talent. I don't know anything about Sana Amanat, but I wonder if people who start in comics are capable of making that jump. So I don't know, by the way, with lack of talent, I mean, to be a Disney executive, that's a highly political game. You have to have a lot of insider knowledge. You have to be able to maneuver kind of the halls. And it's a very, I guess, politically intense place to be. I think a lot of people look at Disney as kind of the fun house of mouse, and it's all fine. But I mean, the politics are fierce in Disney, probably one of the fiercer companies to work with at that level. And there's a lot of really good articles out there that talk about how executives have sabotaged each other at various times to get what they want. And it's just, anyway, very, very cutthroat kind of environment. Don't know that Sana can play in that role terribly well. And then there's some other skeletons in that closet going on right now that have nothing to do with this, but are absolutely going to prevent this from happening. But anyway, back to the video. Even with the movies and all of that making billions, I don't feel like comics as a medium has really gained much respect. That is true. I'm 37, and when I was in college in my 20s, I had multiple people express shock at the mere idea that comics are still being published, and many more who definitely look down on comics as a medium. The general disdain for comics was so common that now I don't even bring up my interest in comics to new people anymore. From my experience, I'm left to wonder if working in comics outside of a creative area like writing or drawing might be a detriment in moving up the corporate ladder. If the HR people and other higher-ups working at Disney Warner Brothers view comics in the same way as many of my classmates did, I can't imagine them ever offering a job to someone whose work experience was mostly comic-related. Do you think that might be part of the problem in attracting talented people? If my hypothesis is correct, no talented person would ever choose to work in comics since it's only going to hold them back career-wise. So I don't think 100%, but there's definitely truth to what you're saying. I think that comics has a stigma to it. And unfortunately, when you look at the success of movies, and you've seen it in some of the interviews, but you see it in some of the attitudes and the people involved, they view the movies as taking kind of a raw, unpolished, almost garage type industry, polishing it up, making it marketable, and then making a bunch of a good movie out of it. And the studios and the big companies, they value the people who can polish this stuff up and make something big out of that property. And they should. That's where the money is. But it does undermine what comics brings to the table in the first place. There is no doubt, and I've heard this firsthand. I've read interviews. You've seen it in some of the stuff. I mean, even some of the interviews with Jim Lee and Daniel Cherry in a weird way kind of backed into this. But comics are seen as definitely the lesser of this medium, and it's seen as largely the kind of the unimportant one. It's almost like a first draft of a script, and then you bring in a true expert to come in and make that script really, really sing and really work and be marketable and make a lot of money. And that's how comics are viewed. They're not viewed as ready for prime time. They're viewed as just the kind of the early scratch work. And so if you're wanting to be an executive, it's going to be very hard, including Joe Quesada. I mean, you look at the people involved. Jim Lee is, for all intents and purposes, a mascot. And I don't mean that, to denigrate him. I mean it as, he's this guy. He's a well-known artist. He's a good poster child for the company. And bluntly, this is going to sound distasteful, but he's Asian. And I think that as they're wrestling with this concept of, it's a white boy industry, they can hold this guy up and say, look, here's somebody who, clearly has the talent. Jim Lee, number one selling comic book the last 30, 40 years with X-Men, and, super loved in this industry, well known, not white. And look, he's running this company. But I think they lean on that aspect hard and fast. And in many cases, once you peel back the covers and you look at it, it doesn't feel like Jim Lee's actually making any company decisions. It's more like he's kind of just they're helming this thing, and they're using him for his art skill and as almost a Stan Lee type character in Stan Lee's later years, how he was portrayed. But you look at Joe Quesada. Why hasn't Joe Quesada moved up the Disney executive ladder? Why isn't he sitting there, as the right hand to Kevin Feige, putting all this stuff together? He's not. Why? Well, I think part of it is what you're talking about. I think he's viewed as somebody who, drew some comics, ran the show at Marvel, helped get some things put together, but he's very much a comic guy and not a business guy. And I think there's that phrase, which I've heard used before, is a lot of these leaders in comics are not business guys. They're comics guys. You look at some of the other Marvel executives in that field. David Gabriel. Why isn't he moving over to a more prominent executive position within Disney? He's not. I mean, they consistently overlook him. Why? Because he's a comics guy. He's not a business guy. I think he has his MBA. I may be wildly wrong about that, but I mean, some of these people have business degrees, but because they're in comics, it creates this perception that they're just not serious people. They're not executive people. And so to your premise here, if you are on a career track, if you're, going to college and you're thinking, I want to be in an executive position at one of these big companies, you are going to not choose the comics path. You're gonna play the odds, and you're gonna say, look, just looking at it over the last 30 years, people who take that track don't make it. Unless I can somehow take the Jim Lee route where I, become a massively, wildly successful comic artist that everybody knows around the world, and then I kind of back into this leadership position in a big corporation because the other people involved, Jeff Johns is going to go off and do studio work, and Dan Didio is going to get fired, and then I'll have the job. I mean, if you're playing the odds, that would be a terrible decision. Now, by the way, I did mention one name in there, Jeff Johns. So Jeff Johns is a comic guy, and he did make it into Hollywood. But Jeff Johns is, again, he's got a high-profile position. You definitely would want his salary. All that stuff is good, but it's still not. It's not a position that is really. He struggled to get it, I guess is the way to put it. He is not moving up and out of comics into Warner Media to do bigger and better things. Now, it's worth mentioning at this point that some of these people, they like comics. They got into comics for a reason. So if I'm, measuring success by you're able to get out of comics and do other things, maybe that's not the success criteria we should be looking at. I mean, if you love comics, you'd want to stay in comics, right? So, you're not looking at it saying, hey, I want to be a, huge executive over at Disney. You're saying, I want to be a huge executive in comics, and there's a ceiling with that, and they know it and they accept it, and that's fine too. And that may be the case with people like Joe Quesada. I know Sana Amanat definitely wants and has a deep desire to move higher up the chain with Disney. She's not somebody who's looking at it going, comics is my final destination, even though it looks like it is going to be. But that is, many people who are in this are in it because they love comics. It is the answer to, why would somebody work in this field when the money is lower and they could do better work out somewhere else? Because they love comics. And that's good. That we do want people like that. We do want the passion for that. I think comics in many cases gets filled with people who either are there because they love it, or they're there because they can't go anywhere else because the money isn't good enough to to attract bigger people, so it doesn't bring in some of the competition that would naturally happen in other fields. And some people aren't talented enough to go other places, so they just stay where they're at because the money's poor. That's been the premise of the video you're commenting on. And the tough part with that is what I want to do is create a system to have an environment where the people who are there, who love comics and are passionate about it, are able to continue to grow both their careers and their skills. Take a writer who's coming in new to comics. Take Jed MacKay. So I've been talking about him a lot lately with some of this stuff. I think the guy has talent. I think he's a good writer. I think the smartest thing that Marvel could do is give him a really seasoned editor and some people to say, hey, let's craft your career. Let's make sure you don't fall into tropes with dialogue and storytelling, that you're able to grow and advance and become a powerful player. Who's doing that in comics? And the answer is nobody is doing that in comics. It's, you've got to figure it out for yourself or you wash out. And that part that part's broken. But I think we need to find the people who are there for passion, because I do get the sense from McKay that he loves comics and he wants to do big things in comics. He's not here because he can't get anything better. I think he wants to do great work. So, we need to give him the industry needs to give him reasons to do that. And then I think there's other people who, seem far more interested in bitching on Twitter, and in many cases have a distaste for comics. And in some instances, and I've heard this firsthand from writers, I'm only in comics until I get that YA deal, or I get that Scholastic deal, or I get a job. One person saying I'm getting a job as a news staffer, a news writer at Slate or CNN. And I remember thinking, oh my God, you realize they don't pay anything in those places? Like Slate will give you some peanuts. You're actually making more in comics. That's a terrible decision for you. But those people, I think that we need to find a way to up the money in comics so we get, some more talented people in, so that, you have more of a concerted effort to make sure we're putting out a good product, because the money matters then. And you wash those people out as fast as, if you're in it just because, there's nowhere else for you to go and you've hit the ceiling of your talent, then you should leave. But I think there is a stigma against comics. I think you're on something. I don't think it's all of it, but I definitely think it's some of it. So thank you for the question. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And thanks for listening.